Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're huge advocates of taking your own health into your own hand. And the most efficient way, and also probably most effective way of doing that is by making healthier choices around home, including the foods you eat, product you use, etc. Today's Instagram live guest really exemplify a sustainable lifestyle by making conscious decisions around her home. So we're going to be joined by Liz Fun, host of the Homegrown Podcast. I was recently on the Homegrown Podcast and then also learned a lot from Liz. This is probably one of the best podcasts out there. Liz actually provides real food education for the entire family and the community. So we're going to talk to her about very unique topics today, from like raw dairy to sourdough starters and much more. So I saw.
Here you are. Hi. Wow, I'm like way too close to the camera. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's so nice to see you again.
I know. I'm very excited about this because I've been like watching your sourdough making and then also the newly released the raw dough diet. We're gonna have to talk about it.
Yes,
I'm
I
super
love it.
excited.
Let's do it.
Cool. Tell us a little bit about your background, like how you became a homegrown living advocate.
Yeah. So, when I was writing the first nutrition curriculum for my daughter, I was trying to think of a word that would encompass kind of the idea behind it all. And I really feel like what our kids learn about food and nutrition and family legacy, all of that, obviously it starts in the home, like it's homegrown. So that's a big aspect of it. Our kids are learning about food and nutrition, at the kitchen table, the counter, at the grocery store, the farmer's market, wherever you're shopping. They're absorbing all of that. And then the other piece of it that was really lacking in the market space was something tangible to give context because food's really hard for adults. And so you can only imagine that our kids are having a really hard time. So that's the homegrown kind of, that's where that word came from. But then there's another element to it where if you are a homesteader or a gardener or like us, you harvest your own meat, there are things in your diet that are homegrown. So it's twofold. It doesn't mean that you have to be your own food producer. We live in the suburbs, and so we still shop a lot at the grocery store. But it's this idea of taking personal responsibility when it comes to educating our kids and our families and ourselves. And that all of those beautiful first early learnings and memories around food start in the home. So they're homegrown. And I kind of transitioned into this holistic view of health and wellness after just having a terrible relationship with food myself. I had a terrible eating disorder in high school, and then I, did every fad diet there is out there. I was vegetarian for a while, was dairy free, gluten free for a while. I was very low fat, in the time where that was really popular. Um, and so I walked those paths and I just never found true food freedom, even after going through inpatient treatment for my eating disorder. I didn't find the food freedom I found until I started to educate myself on real food. And, I always have to call out the Weston A. Price Foundation because they were pivotal in my discovery of like, okay, what is actually nourishing? Are animal foods actually good for us? Is there a way to consume dairy where it's like I can feel good about it? It's not a cheap food. So the Weston A. Price Foundation was huge. I read several books. And then, just like being on this journey and stumbling forward and really learning along the way. It's been probably about 7 years since we started to make the shift towards raw dairy. That was like our first moment of, okay, what does this kind of real food ancestral diet mean? And then from there, we've gone on that journey learning more along the way, and it's been really fun. So,
This is so cool. One other thing I also want to highlight is just also not understanding where food come from, for kids and then for everyone. But also, I felt like you guys also taking into sustainability into account as well, and what's actually good for the environment. That's also huge.
yeah, it's huge. And right now, it's such a hot topic, and it's really important because there are a lot of forces and money and power behind this narrative that plant-based diets are the future of sustainability. And I'm so thankful for people like Diana Rogers and several others who are actually telling the full story of
Mhm.
sustainability, and that we can actually have regenerative models of agriculture and they can restore our land. And we're not just talking about
Mhm.
cow, methane. Instead, we're talking about carbon sequestration. So, a lot of the time, only one part of the story is told, and that makes the headlines and it gets people fired up. And then, you have a whole ideology behind that way of
Mhm.
thinking. It's very persuasive. And, media is a big part of that. Media, in the form of documentaries or books or, Instagram pages or any podcasts, like those are influential. And so that's really kind of where we see ourselves kind of stepping in, creating
Mhm.
purposeful media that tells a different story, that tells the story of, hey, how can we coexist with animals and plants and raise them ethically and teach
Mhm.
our kids, where our food comes from and what does the word sustainability even mean? Is that even the correct word we should be using? Do we
Mhm.
want something that's sustainable or regenerative? So those are two very different ideas. So yeah,
Love it. You also use the word nourished a lot
yeah,
describing your family. Like, tell us that. Like, what does that mean to you?
yeah. I mean, I just spent so many years being so undernourished. I didn't quite connect the dots until recently, but I did really terribly in school. I almost didn't graduate high school. I had an awful ACT score. My parents made me retake the ACT because my score was like below 20. And then I fell asleep in the middle of the ACT because I was just so undernourished and, randomly filled out all the bubbles, ended up getting the same score. My parents were so mad. Barely squeezed my way to a community college. And then I um, ended up thriving in college and got a master's degree and actually learned what it was like to fuel my body well because at that time I had a daughter, so I had no other choice. So I really made the transition between being very nutrient deficient to, wow, I'm actually feeding my body and I can see what the changes are. And so I don't like the term healthy, because
Mhm.
everyone has their own version of that. I don't love the term, and there's a lot of good food, bad food talk. I would rather just talk about what's nourishing to
Mhm.
us. And nourishing is not just what we put into our body. It's, are we, properly fueling ourselves spiritually, mentally? Are
Mhm.
we pushing our bodies physically? Are we practicing, regular rhythms that are keeping us fully nourished? And I know it's kind of a buzzword right now, but I just say we're a nourished fam because we try to hit those marks, all of those five capitals we try to hit. So
I feel good just start hearing it.
yeah,
It
it's
just feels good. Yeah,
it is.
exactly. It's like earth.
And it's positive, like I'm
Mhm.
speaking it over our family. We're a nourished fam,
Mhm.
Doesn't mean we do everything perfect. Doesn't mean every food choice is perfect. But we are trying really hard to make conscientious decisions. And that's our goal. I think there's a difference between having, a set uh, diet and having kind of standards that you're looking to reach for. So when you can have a broader framework for, okay, these are the standards we want to meet with our food because we want to go out and be healthy and be active and help, people move furniture, help our friends move in, or, go for long runs, whatever we want to do. That's why we make those decisions to reach for the nourishing things.
I love it's also a continuous thing. It's just not a one-time thing. You continue to make improvement and then you continue to practice this lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why on our podcast we feature people's real food journeys because it's such a journey. And as you know, the last question we ask every guest is, "Hey, what are you learning today? What's your next phase? What's the new passion you're leaning into, or where are you kind of relearning ideas that you maybe thought you knew before, but now you're like, whoa, my assumptions were incorrect." And so it's just good. It kind of keeps us in that forward center of mass, right? We're always moving forward and encouraging people to do the same.
So you also homeschool your kids. So how do you balance all the responsibility you have around the house, teaching your kids, and all of us like following your feed and listen to your podcast?
That's a great question, a very timely one, actually. I've had a lot of conversations this week in my house about, okay, how are we doing this? Um, it looks different every year. I always say we take it year by year, kid by kid. Right now, our oldest child is in the 6th grade, and I'm very quickly learning that 6th grade math is like about my limit. Like I was asked the other day what, the like to multiply two exponents together and then find the square root. And I was like, I will have to relearn all of this to teach this. And so we're constantly checking in. Like I'm trying to constantly check in with myself on how am I going to show up for her in an educational way, but also in a relational way. And so that's the beauty of homeschool. We can kind of mix and match it however we whatever fits our needs. So right now Sophie is taking some enrichment classes at a program where she has a math teacher and a sewing teacher and a computer teacher teaching her how to use like Excel and Word and all those important programs, and a writing class, right? And then we have curriculum at home that gets into like basics of chemistry and botany. And she loves reading. And so we do a lot of our history through reading really amazing literature, either people's biographies, like the Dear America series is amazing. It's more simple than you think. I think people think, oh, homeschooling, I couldn't sit at the table for 6 hours with my kid teaching them. I'm like, I can't either. One, it happens way faster when it's just one-on-one. Two, recognize where you need to bring someone in. It's okay to get a math tutor. I've had that conversation this week. Like we might get a math tutor even though she is a teacher. YouTube, like it's 2022. There's so much free content on YouTube just explaining basic math concepts or basic science concepts even, or different periods of history. You can watch documentaries together. So it's kind of an eclectic thing. I don't do like one program. I know that a lot of families do. They find a program they love, they stick to it. Mine's more eclectic, but it just requires me to constantly check in. And so, um, we did just make our first hire at Homegrown. So we have an employee now who is helping us further our business. And so that's another strategic move that we're making because we want to continue creating resources for people and showing up in a space where it's so desperately needed to find the truth about these topics. So I wake up really early. I, try to feed myself the best food I can. I really try, even this week, it's weird. I've like cut back on caffeine because I don't want to be addicted to coffee that powers me through my day. Like I want to have natural energy. And so I really have to maintain those rhythms so that I can write a raw dairy guide, so that I can, we're about to launch a new product. I had to spend an entire weekend shooting the art for that product. It was the most exhausting 24 hours of my life, having to cook all these meals and then get the photo and stage all this food. I had never done that before. So, I don't love the word balance. It's not balance. It's just having your to-do list right in front of you. My husband helps so much because he's a business owner too, so he gets it. And that morning coffee chat is like pivotal in our life. So having our to-do list was absolutely necessary. And we have 3 young kids, so your days actually starting to feel a lot longer, and it's okay that you can have a breather. I took my kids to the park this afternoon. We were planning on watching a documentary. We never got around to it. So we maintain a certain level of flexibility, and then I also build in certain rhythms to make sure that I'm getting work done. Like today, I was barely on my Instagram because I'm trying to get my latest book to my editor by tomorrow. So there is some ebb and flow for sure.
This is cool. We want you to keep creating these great contents. We need them. Now let's get into food. So like home cooking. Like what's your favorite meal? Like
Well, we're getting into soup season, and we do cook soup all year round in our house. Like we do chili in the summer. It's not weird for us, but I really love like potato leek soup. I really love I just made like a random hearty vegetable soup. It's when you make your own meat stock, which is so simple. You just boil a chicken. The soup tastes so much better. So making a quick soup is amazing. I have a favorite veggie wrap, or not veggie wrap, lettuce wrap recipe I love that doesn't involve soy. It's just coconut aminos, but it's like so good and savory and delicious. we're big taco fans. Even in our apartment when my husband and I were married early on, we used to make tacos all the time and we'd make this really zesty slaw with it. And then years later at his own business where he caters, now he serves a taco bar with that same slaw. So like tacos are just in it for us. And burger. I'm a really big fan of like an amazing burger. I don't feel like a cheeseburger needs to be demonized as bad food. Grass-fed beef, organic sourdough bun, like beautiful lettuce, cheese. It can be amazing and whole and nourishing. So those are like my staple foods that I love.
I'm hungry already.
I know. It's dinner time here too, which is like not.
So what are some tips for eating real food on a budget? Like what are some like must have in your house?
Yeah. So I kind of the most basic advice I give people is to think about simplicity, right? So we're so used to going to the meat aisle and buying the cellophane wrapped chicken, right? In its butchered parts without any skin or bones. And so we'd maybe pick up a packet of chicken breasts or chicken thighs or whatever. And then, if you're making a soup, you have to go to the carton aisle or the soup aisle and pick up a carton of chicken stock. And it's like the separation of those two is insane to me because you could just pick up one whole chicken and you could roast that chicken or you could cook it in water to create a broth and then use it as like pulled chicken that's really moist and tender. And then you have both meals for your dinner, a chicken, and you have stock. And the stock, you could argue, is free because you really just need to throw that chicken carcass in with some filtered water, let it simmer for like 4 hours, salt and pepper it. If you have celery or onions or carrots on hand, throw those in there, but they're not necessary. And so it's utilizing your ingredients to the fullest. It's buying the whole chicken. It's making that a rhythm. Gosh, learning how to make sourdough is so much cheaper than buying like the bougie organic bread at the store. Or like even people who are like, hey, I want to be gluten free. I don't have a intolerance necessarily, but it feels healthier to me. I would encourage them, hey, look into fermented grains, look into fermented sourdough. And once you understand that process, my breads cost me, dollars versus or pennies versus, $8 to $9 at the store. And it's three ingredients. It's water, flour, and salt. And I have full control over it. So really getting back to the simple foods, the basic foods. We eat a lot of the same kind of things on repeat, but we just elevate them a little bit slightly. And then that's another thing too. I feel like sometimes people think you have to go to the grocery store and buy 50 things. I probably buy 20 things, but I'm buying like 4 zucchinis to stretch me the week and, 2 bunches of carrots versus like a variety of 12 different vegetables, right? So simplify, pare down, and then learn to make those stretch. And that's what we talk about. We have a resource called What's for Dinner where we tell people how to do that and work through their ingredients in a more intelligent way. So
This is especially useful for parents with young kids, multiple young kids, short on time. This would be really useful. And I also want to make a comment on your sourdough bread because not only it's healthy, it looks so good because your decoration on it. I'm like,
yeah.
who doesn't want like a beautiful sourdough in front of them?
Yeah. And you know what? People are intimidated by the artisan loaf. And I will say it's the hardest sourdough to make is a high hydration artisan loaf. That beautiful crusty bread you see all the Instagram influencers posting. That's one version of sourdough. But sourdough in and of itself is a method. So you can use the sourdough starter culture to leaven literally anything. You can use it to leaven cinnamon rolls or pizza crust, or you can make a traditional sandwich bread by adding in fat and some sort of sweetener, and that creates a softer texture. So if you're like, I cannot get my sourdough going, or I can't make a big, beautiful, crusty loaf for soups, like try a sandwich bread that you bake in a loaf tin or try a pizza crust. It doesn't even have to rise that much. Like pizza, you actually don't want it to rise a ton. So it's a pretty fail-safe way to dip your toe into utilizing sourdough starter culture versus a packet of yeast at the store. And again, so much cheaper, and honestly better for you. So
How did you get started and then started doing sourdough and how do you take care of it? Like start this sourdough starter.
Oh, I failed hard for a few years. So I was making like hockey pucks, like really bad bread. And I remember I there was a point where I thought I was making good bread, and Joey was like, "Oh yeah, this is actually edible." And then once I actually got good at it, I realized that bread was trash. So the thing that and there's several good books written at this point in times that you could go read, or there's a couple good Instagram accounts you can follow. But at the time I was learning it, there wasn't like no one was speaking my language. I wasn't they were using complex terms like levain and autolyse and all of these like things that as a baker you don't really need to know. You just need to know, hey, let your water and flour sit for a minute, and your starter if you want. Hold off on adding your salt, but also if you want to add, like, there were so many of the kind of jargon terms that really threw me off. So it took me a while to finally I watched YouTube, a lot of Proof Bakery. They're in Arizona. They have a great YouTube channel. I watch a lot of just, okay, how are people making sourdough? And then, I eventually compiled a guide that just spoke my language. That was like, let me tell you what sourdough is, how to make it, all of these different tools that you might need for it. And in there, we talk about the starter. So if you think about what a sourdough starter is, it's really just a culture of bacteria and yeast. And yeasts are everywhere in our environment, little microscopic yeast, wild yeasts everywhere, and so are various, forms of bacteria. And so what we're doing when we mix water and flour together is we're basically just creating like a home, a host, a environment for them to naturally come in and populate. So they want to multiply all the time. They're constantly growing, growing, growing. So they're throwing a party in your jar. And so you see the evidence of that party by something called the rising and falling of your starter. So if you right now just threw water and flour in a jar and just left it on your counter for 3 days, you probably start to see some bubbles, some activity. And so, what we're doing when we're constantly feeding or discarding is we're just refreshing those resources so that the microbes can multiply. Because at some point, they'll go dormant. They'll be like, hey, we don't have any more food, or it's too cold in here. We don't want to bubble up. And what that bubbling actually is it's the microbes they are eating through the starches in the flour, and then they're releasing carbon dioxide. And so that's why when we talk about sourdough, we actually want to use a strong gluten flour, because if you think of the web that gluten can form and the elasticity, that can trap those gas bubbles, and that's how we get big, beautiful bread. So a gluten-free sourdough is a little bit counter the whole purpose of utilizing that method, although some people can do it. But yeah, I failed hard for a long time. Then it finally clicked for me, and then I processed things. Obviously, you can tell verbally, and so I kind of wrote it out in a guide. And yeah, it's been downloaded a ton of times. So I'm so happy. Like people are getting the art of sourdough for free, just a little guide. So yeah.
Amazing. Okay, now another guide, which is the new release, the raw dairy guide.
Yes.
Okay, like tell us about raw dairy, why you're like such an advocate, and then why do we need to consume that?
Yeah. This is a hot topic, so controversial. Honestly, that's why I love talking about it, because it really helps paint the picture of something I thought I knew and understood for so many years. And then when I relearned the truth about dairy, my mind was blown. And I was like, wait, how many other subjects do I need to do this on? So, whenever we're talking about raw dairy, we first need to learn about pasteurization. Pasteurization came from a man named Louis Pasteur in the late 1800s. And, he was a French microbiologist who is kind of he's thought to have coined the term or the theory germ theory, or at least elevated it to what it is today. And so he actually got his first start in with pasteurization experiments in the French wine industry. And so he was helping pasteurize wine, or he suggested the heat treatment of wine to kill the enzymes so that the wine could travel further without spoiling, because enzymes break down things, right? And so if you kill off the enzymes, then you can kind of freeze that product in time and space a little bit, and it won't kind of degrade naturally as it would if those enzymes were active. So eventually, they did utilize his method for a while, but shortly after, the French wine industry ditched the pasteurization method. Today, our wine's not pasteurized. Um, but then came along dairy, and a critical thing happened in the late 1800s. If you think about the Industrial Revolution, the shifting of people, the migration to urban communities. And so, people have had dairy cows in their backyard for forever. As long as we've domesticated animals, we've been milking a cow, a goat, a sheep, whatever. They're not taking that into their house and boiling it on the stove. Pasteurization actually happens at very high heat under pressure. It's not something you can do in your family kitchen. And so we've been consuming dairy in its whole raw form for a long time, but it wasn't until people made that shift into more urban, concentrated populations. What happened is they brought their cows with them. And instead of having nice green pasture to graze, they all kind of confined together. And a really common story is that they confined right next to the distilleries. So you would have distilleries producing alcohol with this corn and wheat and barley mash. And then you'd have this leftover distillery kind of swill, and they would feed that to the cows to the point where these cows couldn't stand up. They were overweight, their teeth were falling out. And if they became so diseased, they'd just slaughter them and butcher them and sell it as meat. And so this was not a time where we had good animal welfare. We also didn't have awareness for overall health. And so what was happening is a lot of these cows were getting sick, bovine tuberculosis, terrible illnesses. And so then the people drinking their milk would get sick. So it was a case of sick cows, sick environments, and then people obviously getting sick. So that's an important thing to note. But the other fascinating shift is that we test for those diseases today. And there's areas of the country that haven't seen an outbreak of bovine tuberculosis in years, decades. And so the reason we pasteurize today is because everything is so kind of mass manufactured. You have dairy facilities that are producing milk or processing milk from hundreds of different cows. They're lumping it all into one vat, and then they're separating the cream so that they can, create skim milk and 2% and sell off some of the cream for the ice cream manufacturers. And it's this mass production of dairy, which requires an extra level of, hey, we have to make sure no bacteria entered in during the milking or the bottling process. It's not that the milk coming out of the cow is harmful. It's the same reason why our orange juice is pasteurized. Every juice, every liquid you see in the grocery store is pasteurized, and it says pasteurized for your safety. We should not then assume that a raw orange is bad for us, right? But can a whole living food have potential to carry a harmful pathogen and let that thing breed if it's given the right environments, if it's not refrigerated right away, if it's not held at the right temperature? Absolutely. So there's a huge difference between getting raw dairy from a local farmer who has maybe 2 cows or even larger. I don't want to say they only have to be tiny, but they have the understanding that this process is being consumed as raw versus going to a dairy farmer and saying, hey, before you pasteurize that milk, let me drink it. 2 different things. So we specify all of that in the guide. We talk about the history of pasteurization, Pasteur, kind of his perfectly timed innovations. And it was actually over 100 years between Pasteur's work and the time that the FDA finally mandated the pasteurization of all milk in the US. So if you think about that, that's a long time for people to be still consuming really harmful dairy, right? It's more of a matter of, hey, what happened in those 100 years? How quickly did we start to produce more food for more people through, more concentrated means? So it's a big topic.
It's huge. Oh my God. We're going to have to email you back just to talk about that because there's a lot to pack here. Yeah. It's amazing. People need to look at the dairy guide. And not only that, I also want to say the graphics, the photos, and then the story. It's a beautiful guide.
Thank you.
This is awesome. Wow. So I know we're getting close to time, but I also want you to share a bit more about the Homegrown Podcast because I had a lot of fun recording that podcast with you guys. So tell us a little bit about it, what kind of topic you cover, and where can people find it?
Yeah. Well, we loved having you on. I have to say that, Jenna, because it was such a blast. I felt like I learned so much. So many of our listeners loved your episode and it was incredible. So that one particularly was on like phthalates and BPA and all the good things that you always talk about. But we started the podcast in February of this year, and I think we just published our 39th episode. So we're cranking out episodes every single Wednesday. It's my husband and I that host it, and sometimes it's just me and him chatting about a topic. Like we go hard on raw dairy. We have a couple podcast episodes dedicated to raw dairy. Sometimes we're sharing a guest's real food journey. We've had all sorts of people on. We've had most recently a former MasterChef contestant who is also a hunter and a forager. She was a top 4 finalist and absolutely killed it. And so we got to hear like all of the background and what it's like to cook for Gordon Ramsay and all those fun things we cover on the podcast with her. We have farmers and ranchers on as well to give us kind of insight into their sector of the industry. And then we dive into specific topics. So we have a sourdough episode. Like I mentioned, we have a raw dairy. We do probably 50-50 guests versus Joey and I talking, but if we might do a book overview, we might do anything that kind of, our tagline is like sharing the truth about food and farming and family. Like there's some family in there just because that's who we are. So we hope that, it's a wide enough range where if you're not listening every single week, you're at least tuning into the episodes that interest you. And that's like all we want to do. We just want to share information in a really meaningful way. And because of that, they are kind of longer form. So about 1 to 2 hours, which is kind of a long episode. But for those that stick in there, I think they benefit. And it's been really fun to produce. Yeah, so it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or whatever that one is. And pretty much anywhere you find podcasts. We also have a streamer feed going to our website, which is homegrowneducation.org. So yeah.
This is so wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing everything and also for what you do. This is like so incredible. And I want to encourage everybody here today, follow Liz at homegrown_education. We're all big fans. So we're going to keep following all the contents and then all the guides and all the education material you're gonna put out.
Cool. Awesome. Well, it was great talking to you, Jenna.
Thank you so much.
See ya.
Okay, bye.